All right, we are live. Good evening to everyone. My name is Kerry Sparling, and I'm the editorial director for Children with Diabetes. And I'm here for tonight's Screenside Chats with CWD, which when we scheduled this, I didn't realize it was Valentine's Day. So my planning was a little less than optimal, but I'm here in my pink shirt to hang out with my friend Dave for our Valentine's Day chat that I hope that you guys enjoy. But just you're over here on this side, Dave. So by way of quick introduction, we're going to be talking about the T1D Exchange, and Dave Walton, the CEO of the T1D Exchange, has joined us this evening. Do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. Good to be with you.
So Dave, we have two options. I can read your bio and you can try not to blink the entire time, or you can give a brief introduction to the community. Your call.
I can give just a brief intro here. So hello, everyone. As Kerry mentioned, Dave Walton of T1D Exchange. I've been with the exchange for a couple of years now as the CEO. I've been working in the diabetes industry since 2006, where I started at Animas and worked on the insulin pump, some new products, including the Animas Vibe, which was the first pump to have Dexcom integrated into it. And we launched that in Europe in 2011. I've had type 1 for 25 years, just hit my diversary last month.
Ooh, happy diversary.
Yeah, I don't normally think of that, but when I started adding it up, I realized the big 25 was coming. So, anyway, I'm happy to be here, and I've got a very short presentation just to provide a little overview of T1D Exchange, and then we can keep it to a less formal kind of interaction here. But
and Dave, while you're pulling up your slides, I just want to remind everybody who's watching at home that if you have questions as we're going through this discussion, if you have questions about Dave's slide or about T1D Exchange or something that just pops into your brain that you want to ask, you can either pop that into the chat over at the bottom of the screen, or you can use the Q&A feature if you want to ask that question anonymously. And so, Dave, while you are doing your presentation, I'm going to just disappear video-wise so I don't make any weird faces, but I will be here the whole time and I'll pop back on once you're done, okay?
Great.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we covered the intro, so I will skip through that. But certainly one thing I wanted to point out, and I think for the audience here as well, I was diagnosed at 24. So thankfully, I was a college wrestler, and I feel fortunate I didn't have type 1 on top of some of the silly things I was doing with my weight and so forth, wrestling. But I have a perspective on, seeing what it's like, for a younger child. My nephew over here to the right, Crew, got diagnosed at 3, my sister's son, and, watching them kind of go through a lot of the issues and so forth, the experiences of being a school age and dealing with babysitters and a whole host of things. It's certainly a different perspective than I had, although I've spoken to a lot of families over the years, including at the CWD Friends for Life conference that I attended several times. And just for a little flashback, which I thought was interesting, and I found some old presentations from my old job. I was down there in 2010 when at J&J at Animas, we were working on our own closed loop system at the time. And we did a focus group, and there were about 90 people in the room that were caregivers and, kids or teenagers with type 1. And, but we asked the caregivers in particular, what they were focused on with this concept of a closed loop system. Like, what were the problem areas you hope that something like that would help with? And certainly you can see that, going low during the night, during sleep for their child was certainly, at the top of the list. And, obviously other things are important, but that's why a lot of people obviously, don't get a good night's sleep, focus on looking at it with the tools we have now, much different than what we had back then. But it's interesting to fast forward and see, what's happened since that was a lot of talk and things that were in development and were years and years away, to see, where we're at now. And, with Medtronic and Tandem being on the market, Insulet coming this year, Tidepool coming this year, really is an incredible time to be around kind of the diabetes technology space and to see what's happening. For people to wake up every morning in a relative tight range, just several years ago, that would have been very difficult for a lot of people. And I've been able to, personally experience that. And I'm just, ecstatic about the potential of a lot of these these things, and having competition is a good thing too, because it forces everyone to raise their game and continue to innovate. So, it feels like we always say it's a great time. It's so much easier now to have type 1 than it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And that very much is true. But looking at these systems, this is the kind of the thing that we've been shooting for so long. So T1D Exchange, for those who aren't familiar with it, we are a not-for-profit, and our sole focus right now is what can we do to try and improve outcomes for people with type 1? And we do that in a pretty interesting way that's very data centric, but very much collaborative and partnering with providers and diabetes centers. We work with individuals directly and caregivers through our registry and our online community, which I'll talk about briefly. So we gather a lot of data, we kind of document what's going on in the real world, but we also work on initiatives to try and change care at diabetes centers so that more people are using devices that work and provide benefit. People are being screened for depression and other things that can get in the way. And so we take an active role in working with them. So I'll talk about kind of the online community, our online patient registry, and kind of debunk what that means. It sounds a little more intimidating than it really is. And then our quality improvement collaborative, which is this group of diabetes centers around the country that work with us. So some of you may be familiar and have heard prior, the term glue. That was the name for our online community. We actually found out that a lot of people didn't realize that glue and T1D Exchange were connected, and we just decided to kind of not emphasize the glue as much, even though it was pretty well known, and let people understand what T1D Exchange was. But we do have about 28,000 people who have registered, but really 12,000 respond at least kind of once a month to different things that we do. A question of the day, we put articles out, we interview CEOs or other leaders in the diabetes space, some social media influencers, et cetera. But the idea is that we can get a pulse on what's going on. We can share information with people and just have this forum for sharing some diabetes news. And so, other organizations do similar things, but we've got a lot of people that, participate with us, and sometimes we'll participate in surveys that we'll put out to the online community. We might ask a question of the day. So this is an example. Do you wear a pump or sensor site in a kind of a visible place, like on your arm or leg? And, we look at these responses just to, get a sense of what people might respond to on a particular question or issue. And so lots of things around COVID and telemedicine and health insurance and a lot of the kind of relevant topics that people care about. But our registry, it's something that I wasn't that familiar with this before I joined, about this term and what it really meant. Literally, we are just kind of creating a system to track people over time, where we ask them basically like an initial 30-question survey, and we get some, what product do you use? When were you diagnosed? Do you see an endocrinologist or a primary care physician or a pediatrician for you or your child's care? And we get these answers, and it kind of gives us a snapshot of things. And every week we're adding like 75 to 100 people to this registry. But then from there, we can do all kinds of things. Like a company will contact us and say, hey, we want to talk to people in the Boston area who are using CGM. How many people do you know there? And we can look at our information and find out what that is, and then connect them to do a specific survey or something that brings together someone wanting to do research with kind of the patients and the individuals with type 1 or the caregivers that we have in our system. So it's a very useful thing. And we have a lot of device users, a lot of pump and CGM users, which is great. We're actually doing some things to link Dexcom data now. If someone's willing and interested to kind of link a Clarity account to their registry account, we can now kind of have that information, and we protect it and treat it very, very sensitively, but we can do analysis on kind of low blood sugar frequency with our registry participants and do some things that are helpful to from a research standpoint. And the reason this is important is it's not always easy for companies or academic centers to kind of get people to participate in things. And so we're often like an extra resource to try and connect those things. So if people are interested and are willing to do it, the opportunities are kind of presented and brought together, with those. So that's a big value that we can provide. And sometimes these surveys do have some type of compensation for your time, even if it's a survey that takes 20 minutes or so. So that's something that is certainly a big part of it. So T1D registry.org is a kind of a new URL that we use for our registry. And if people listening, are not part of it, we'd encourage you to take a look. You can scan that barcode there, but joining it, certainly it helps us because we do everything from Dexcom wants to do research on a new adhesive. Boom, we get 100 people in an hour for someone that was doing research to help Dexcom with that study. A doctor in California wants to understand telemedicine and if people are getting good care and are satisfied with their telemedicine for diabetes. We got over, almost 2,000 people, I believe, participated in that within a week. So those are the kind of things like we can instantly go and get people involved and get that information to the right people so that they can take action. We also do some webinars as well. We've done some in the last couple of months and have a few more coming on some, very impactful topics around virtual care and COVID and some of the things we found around health inequities that exist. Unfortunately, that we certainly uncovered in our COVID study that we conducted, as well as our quality collaborative, which I'll talk about in a minute. We also work with a lot of nonprofit partners, including CWD, but a lot of the ones that a number of you are probably familiar with, and that's something we believe strongly in. And it's great to have this kind of collegiality around. We try to help others and they try to help us. So we talk to them about, hey, we'd love to get more people in our registry and what can we do to kind of help you with what you're working on. And so that's been a positive. And again, some of the more recent things we've done with either a focus group where we get 5 or 6 people together and we'll talk about an issue in a discussion moderated online, virtually, or surveys on different topics. You can see dealing with hypoglycemia because there's someone making glucagon wants to really understand that for the caregiver, telemedicine, and I mentioned the CGM data that we're going to look at. We've got some companies that are doing really interesting cell therapies that trying to stop the immune reaction for someone before they get diagnosed. So if someone's at risk of developing type 1 because they have an immediate family member with type 1, they can participate in some of these studies too. So we do work in that arena as well, just like some other organizations do. I mentioned this quality improvement collaborative, which is really it's a network of centers, diabetes centers around the country at this point. We have 31 pediatric and adult, and actually it's 23 pediatric diabetes centers and 8 adult diabetes centers. And we work to try to improve the care. And we started at 12 last year and we got up to 30. We added someone else this year. We've got another probably 9 we'll end up adding this year at least. And we share learnings and we provide information, benchmark comparisons on how many people are using CGM, how many people are using a pump, how many people have been screened for depression, how many people have an A1C at 7% or 8%. All these kinds of analyses we do to help them so they can do a better job of taking care of their patients. So that we're pretty proud that we've gotten that to over 45,000 people with type 1 that are being cared for at those sites. And we'll get that number up. But I mentioned, what are we trying to accomplish? Well, we know that CGM can help people get better results. So let's get more people using CGM and let's do it equitably so that it's not a disparity like it is now, where it can be almost 3 times the number of whites using it as Black people. So those kind of things, we are actually working on initiatives to root out in our centers, and they're taking it on very seriously. And so we're kind of happy with kind of the motivation to change some of the things that the data is showing. But pump use, screening for depression, I mentioned, it takes a little bit of time to get and move the whole center and all their patients and for them to be seen and do these things. But it's important work, and we definitely are very focused on that. We've done some interesting work around COVID and telemedicine recently. I mentioned health inequities and getting involved in helping with the infrastructure for trying to track, whether or not people have done screening or not. And if they got results that indicated that a family member might be at risk, we're looking at building a system there so we can help try to match people into research and help other initiatives that are going on like TrialNet. We're looking at a number of possibilities there. So that's important work too. I mentioned the COVID study, and this was the last slide on this collaborative. We've tracked since April like 650 cases of type 1 across the country, type 1 individuals who also got COVID. And so we've looked at how how many were hospitalized, how many had DKA, were they wearing pumps or CGM or not? And so that information, we've done some publications and gotten evidence out to different medical journals and trying to reach more people to kind of spread the news so that people really understood kind of what was taking place. So that was just kind of a high level snapshot of T1D Exchange and kind of the main things that we're involved in. So I'll just pause there. That was pretty close to the 15 minutes that I tried to say I'd keep it to. But again, we're very excited. Like I mentioned, a lot of great things happening with technology. We do research to help some of those companies, but we also do work with academic medical centers. And sometimes we'll initiate our own research on a certain topic like aging and type 1, trying to figure out if there's some special needs there in particular that maybe we can help with. So
awesome.
With that, I will stop sharing so we can.
There we go. Yeah. So the pressure is off. Your desktop is no longer broadcasted to the universe.
There it is. I did not pull it. I did not make any snafus there. So that was good.
Thank you. So I have some questions for you. One quick question though that we did get from a Canadian who is signed on tonight was they wanted to know if Canada was excluded from being part of the registry or if this is just for United States residents only, just as a quick starter.
Yeah, so absolutely. So currently our registry is only the US. However, we have been talking to some people up in Canada, the University of Toronto, about ways that we could work together because there is an effort there that's working on, a registry in Canada. Mm-hmm. And we've actually had multiple meetings where we shared kind of the approach that we've taken, the data that we track, a lot of it. And we had several meetings to kind of help them with what they were doing. Mm-hmm. But then we've talked about how could we work together to kind of unify this so that we were kind of a joint effort, let's say. So that's still underway, still under discussion, but there are a lot of similarities. And, certainly I've had experience with working with people in Canada when I was at Animus and just understand some of the differences, but also the similarities. And, the more we can do things together, I think, North America has a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities between the two countries. So.
Got it. And before the call had started, you and I were talking about how we used to know one another from our days working with or for Animus. And so it was nice to reunite here, yeah. But we were also talking about places that we'd been in person together. And so that kind of led me to want to ask about how COVID has affected the day-to-day interaction that you guys are able to have with your study participants and that sort of thing. How have you guys as an organization to pivot to accommodate for all the chaos that COVID has brought?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, first off, even we as an organization back in March, we pretty quickly moved to virtual. Mm-hmm. We're based in Boston, but there are a few of us that don't live in Boston, but would travel up there at times. So everyone kind of moved instantly virtually. And then some of the projects that we were doing, a lot of them were like, we definitely already were doing interviews and a lot of online kind of virtual focus groups. We did a lot of that. I think we did do some in-person ones, but we also did a lot of virtual ones as well. So it wasn't extremely difficult to make that pivot to do some of those things. I think all in all, we've adjusted pretty well. Hasn't been a dramatic, change in terms, of that and connecting with individuals. Now, we definitely had some events where we would go to try to recruit people into our registry. Actually, the CWD conference and was one example, but there were some other ones too. that, certainly all that changed. And so we participate in online conferences and things. It's a little more difficult to get to people just because, the virtual conference doesn't work as well as in person. And I know Jeff was trying hard to see if he could, before we learned everything we did about COVID last year. Could he try and pull it off? But then, it obviously turned into, no, we can't. And so then we moved to virtual and we adapted.
But that leads, sorry, I'm getting all tangled up in my cords here, but that leads me to a different question too, because part of being part of the registry means giving some of your health information into a repository. And so there are two parts of that question. The first is, how difficult is it to convince people about basically the safety and also the importance of donating their data, so to speak, and giving their information? And also, what is it like to try to pull out information during focus groups virtually? Because I know when you can sit with people, face to face, that ease of use is upped a whole lot more than it is when you're sitting at a computer screen saying, no, I swear I'm a whole person. Like, it's hard to communicate that. So comfort with online registries and then virtual focus groups.
Oh, absolutely. And, comfort about how information is handled or managed is certainly, that's a topic we take very seriously. And we know it's of great importance to a lot of people. I think, we take a lot of precautions, for managing the HIPAA, security rules. And we have a security audit we do and a number of things to ensure that information is protected. I can't go in and look at people's email addresses, names or whatnot. We have a protected area that just, there are a couple of people that have access to do research on certain things, but like certain information is segregated. So we do it very much in a highly secure way for the online registry. So people should feel absolutely comfortable. And we have consent forms and things that people sign. And if they're not comfortable with it, then they don't have to do it. But, we're very interested, like the more that we can pair data, like for example, CGM data, and I was mentioning, we can do time and range analysis and compare it with different aspects of people using this device or on this insulin, or they have a prescription for glucagon or they don't, and they have this many lows or they don't, and all kinds of things that we can do if we can pair CGM data with other information. And so that's going to be our big push here in 2021, is to start doing that. We've kind of connected things so that it's possible. And now we're going to start asking people, hey, can you do this? Will you be okay with sharing this information? So that's the first. In terms of that, the challenge or the difficulty, of getting people to kind of respond and do these things for the research and whatnot, like I kind of alluded to earlier, it's not that difficult. And actually, I've been on a number of calls with a lot of diabetes centers that have talked about how things are more challenging with telemedicine and virtual care versus what's actually gotten a little better. So as an example, they don't get the A1C test for a lot of these visits that are virtual. Okay, but if they have CGM data, they can kind of get a sense of where people have been. But certainly for teens and things, they're getting much more information about maybe some possible mental health issues or questions about sex and alcohol and drug, a number of things that they said they just didn't get that in the in-person visits.
Oh, no kidding.
But they're hearing in the virtual meetings, they'll actually get more forthright information from teenagers in particular. I've heard that from like 4 different centers, all violently agreed that it's a silver lining, that they feel like, wow, I didn't realize, like they're telling me a lot more now. So a lot of these centers are thinking about, I'm going to keep some virtual visits, but I definitely need 1 or 2 in-person visits a year. But I don't know, it might make sense to have a couple of these virtual ones and try to tailor it to, maybe I'll try to get a little of that kind of information at some of those meetings. So
I'm just remembering being a teenager at the endocrinologist's office and having like little flashbacks about that.
Yeah. I like I said, I can imagine how that, it's a very sensitive topic. It's a little touchy, and some people don't want to, talk about things and talk about them with their parents. They're to a doctor they barely know. But absolutely, and actually on the mental health side, I've heard a number of them say, we're actually able to now try to figure out how to go tackle some of these things better. We didn't realize it was as big of an issue as it has been. And it'll be interesting when COVID goes away. Will some of that subside? But if you have the virtual visits, you'll still have the channel to get a little more kind of openness.
And since COVID, and not to make this a discussion about COVID, but because of the situation that we're in pandemic wise, virtual care visits are happening all the time. And I'm wondering if you're seeing a lot of studies and a lot of questions coming from your registry aimed at around that issue because of this, because it's such a big and important topic, especially now. Are you seeing a lot of your research tailored in that direction?
Yeah, well, no, I mean, so I mentioned this one large study we did for a researcher, Dr. Crossan out at UC Davis in California. That was one, but we've talked to a number of people, and look, there are a lot of companies that are trying to figure out how should I best support people like with virtual visits. If sometimes, like, we've seen data from our own survey that suggests that fewer people might have been started on pumps, but CGM wasn't as impacted. CGM might be a little easier to start with virtual visits. So when people couldn't go in April and May to their clinicians, we saw this inversion of all the visits were mostly, there was hardly any telemedicine or virtual visits up through mid-March, and then all of a sudden it flipped, and then almost everything was virtual and there were no in-person visits. And now it's kind of come up where a third of the visits or so are virtual still. And but we're pretty encouraged about, like, you're starting to see all this congressional kind of activity and things of, let's fix these problems that stop virtual care from happening more. Like, oh, you can't be in this state and handle a patient in this state, but you can in person. Right. But you can't virtually, and so I've heard these stories about people having to drive across the state line and go park in a parking lot at the Bob Evans so they can talk to their endo who's in that state, because if they were in their state across the border, oh, you can't do that because of state licensure rules with the medical societies and, and insurance, the way they reimburse things, and all these structural things that get in the way of, well, what do people like, right? I've seen this in multiple surveys that people don't like to take time off work or school, travel, sit in traffic, pay for parking, sit in a waiting room to go and do something if they can do that much more conveniently right when it happens, like virtually. So figuring out how to deal with what works for individuals and balancing that with what's needed. And sometimes you do need to go in person for something. So let's figure out the right size, the proportion of those things. I'm pretty encouraged that it's going to stay. And people make that analogy, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's kind of gotten out there, and everyone's like, wow, this isn't so, but yeah, I like this. Let's keep doing this. So, I mean, I never did a televisit up until about a year ago, a little less than a year ago. It was my first televisit, and I've done, a couple of them, and I hear from all kinds of people that are doing that now. So
when you were mentioning traffic, I used to drive up to the Jocelyn Clinic to go to my endo appointments, and nothing made me angrier at diabetes than having to sit in traffic for hours. It wasn't even the results or the lab work or the clinician, nothing. It was traffic. So just hearing that, I'm sure you're pulling out all kinds of little data nuggets that are not what you might think.
Yeah, it's kind of like blood pressure and blood sugar. Wow, look how high they are on the time of the visit. Wow, we're actually creating these things by making people sit in traffic and be stressed and have adrenaline responses and all that stuff. So
yeah. And I'm thinking, so as you're gearing all these different things, I'm part of the registry. I get the question of the day every single day. Who is coming up with these questions, and where do you draw that content from? Because it's just been amazing to see your organization be so in the weeds with diabetes and the stuff that we are thinking about you and I both, as people with diabetes. So is your team working collaboratively to come up with those questions?
Yes. Yeah, we actually have a brainstorming meeting every month where we talk about, for a portion of those. So some of the questions come from either not-for-profit partners or some industry partners that they get a certain number of questions that they, over a course of a year, they can ask. But we do our own brainstorming about kind of what's relevant, what are kind of some topics that we think would be interesting to the people that are answering in our online community. And that's just the online community. We do the questions of the day, but a lot of our online community end up joining the registry. So I know it gets a little confusing. This is the thing we're trying to help clarify for people. But the online community, anyone can join. There's no consent. It's just get your email address and kind of you can get information and just jump in. The registry, then you have to sign up. You have to be type 1 or be a caregiver, a type 1, and then you do the specific registry kind of thing. But for these questions of the day, yeah, we'll also look at the calendar and say what's relevant. So like we had a question of the day today. Have you ever, or are you currently, like, have you ever dated someone with type 1, or have you married anyone or anything along those lines? And so we're getting that information. I think, I joke to you, like, unbeknownst to me, right before I was diagnosed, I dated a woman with type 1 who kept it quiet and never tested or took insulin in front of me.
Mhm.
And then when I was in the hospital in Philadelphia, she called me and said, if you need someone to talk to, um, I can there. And I said, what are you talking about? You have type 1? Like, I had no idea.
That
Um,
was her disclosure moment, was calling you in the hospital to check in and say, oh yeah, me too.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
pretty wild.
It was pretty wild.
It's a perfect Valentine's Day story, just as a.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then the med student came in, and for the eighth time, I was asked, have you been exposed to a virus in the last 6 months? And I said,
Mhm.
I have no idea, but I did date this woman who had type 1. You can't catch type 1. I'm like, all right, I'm just trying to answer your question. Sorry. But no, that was kind of interesting. But I worked with some people at Animus that one gentleman told me that, he ended up marrying he had type 1, and he married a woman with type 1.
Mhm.
And there were a couple of people that criticized them for doing that.
Oh wow.
As if,
Oh
like,
wow.
oh, you're going to make your kid be type 1? And
Oh
it's
my God.
like, seriously? And it's a 3% chance, I believe. Anyway, it was just, you hear these stories, it opens your eyes, like, this is what happens, right?
Mhm.
It's
And I
kind of
mean, speaking from experience, people with type 1 are very lovable, and I see it makes perfect sense to fall in love with a person who has type 1. Perfect sense.
who understands what it's like. And yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But interestingly, I had just started dating my now wife, and I'm telling her, I don't normally drink like this much water or soda every day, and I don't go to the bathroom every hour. Like, is there something?
Oh.
This just isn't normal. Like, I'm not usually like this, I swear. And a week of symptoms, and I went in, and I had heard of it. I knew about type 1 from a job, a project I had done in my first job, but I didn't really think I had it, but I
Mhm.
could have been. And anyway, ended up being. But she had worked at Eli Lilly and had sold
Oh,
insulin, and had to stay in a hospital and pretend she had diabetes as part of their training for
oh,
like a
okay.
day. And they would give themselves saline shots. So at least she kind of understood, kind of what it was, and
Mhm.
some of the basics. But
And had a sense for it. But I really appreciate you saying that you have it and some of your personal experience, because when people look at different diabetes companies and nonprofits and organizations, there's a lot of like, oh, but they're people from the outside. People don't generally understand that someone like you is one of us. Like, you are someone living with it and also working in it. And so that said, like, the personal experience about living with type 1 and kind of crafting some of getting your personal story out there too. Are you trying to get some of those personal stories in from your registry constituents, or is it
oh yeah,
always
no.
just
Well,
data
and
points?
with the questions of the day, we almost always have an ability for people to comment, and we encourage people to say, provide your story or your context here. So there are times where we get 300 responses usually a day for a particular question.
That's
A
crazy.
lot of times we get 25 comments or so. Certain ones we get much more than that, where we want to hear about the color commentary around
Mhm.
something. Some things you can answer easily, and because we're trying to keep it to one question, we try to keep it simple. We'll keep it a straightforward. All right, click this, but provide your comments if you'd like. And so we get some pretty interesting things that we hear. To your point about, and I'm very vocal about this. It's great to have a third of our organization has type 1.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I feel like we have a lot of perspective, and then there are a few others who have uh, a spouse or a
Mhm.
child with type 1. So there's a lot of understanding. But when I was at Animus, I made this very clear to people. Like, when they would say, Dave, what do people with type 1 think about, well, what do you think XYZ, this product or whatever? Let me divorce what Dave Walton thinks from what research I've done to say, what do most people think, or
Right.
what's the range of opinion? The beautiful thing was I got to understand where I was similar and where I was different. And they would often say, well, you're like one of those first mover, you have all this knowledge and you work in the industry, blah blah blah. And I said, well, that's true on a lot of things, but there's other stuff that I'm like, I like to let other people kind of be the trailblazer, and then I'll be a follower. I wasn't the first one to get on some of these products. I mean, I
Mhm.
got on a pump 15 years ago, but CGM I got on relatively early. But I always was very sensitive to, how am I different than what other people think. And so
Mhm.
I was always doing the surveys and the research. So I got a lot of information that helped ground me into, I'm definitely a little more on this side of the spectrum here, but I'm over here on this side, and try to always put that in context. But at least I knew the right questions to ask, but I would never
Sure.
project me and my response as this is what people think. And I will tell you, I do see some of that happen through my career and working with different companies and different people, that sometimes people get a little too cavalier about saying this is what people with type 1 think because that's what
Mhm.
they think. And
Yeah.
I try to be very conscious of that because it's an easy trap to fall into.
I
Um,
always call those people the diabetes Loraxes. I'm like, there's no one person that speaks for all the people with
exactly.
diabetes.
No,
Yeah.
and that's something to be careful, like on social media and so forth. I think people should be mindful. And look, I didn't jump in the fray around the whole Nick Jonas Super Bowl controversy and all that was going
Mhm.
on. But I did sit back and say, if you just said what was their purpose with that ad, it was to try and reach people that don't use CGM to
Mhm.
think about trying it, right? They weren't talking to me. A lot of us were like, hey, it's great to see us on the big stage and main stage. It is a lot of money for an ad, but when you think about what was their purpose, it wasn't to make me feel better about using my Dexcom. I've been using it for a long time. They were trying to talk to other people who may have never even heard about it because their doctor doesn't know anything about CGM. And
Right.
as much as we think, wow, CGM is the standard of care now, that's great. 60+% of people with type 1 are not using it. And
Mhm.
some of those people are being seen by doctors who haven't talked to anyone about it. They don't know that much about it or aren't really sure. So we just have to remember that. Not to say some of the other things that are brought up they are legitimate and
Sure.
good to see people share their opinions, but I think we should sometimes not be too judgmental about, until we know really what is someone trying to accomplish with something. And
I
yeah,
was just surprised. As a non-sports fan of any kind, I was like, oh, I was watching a sports game at the time that there was a diabetes reference. I was just
yeah. Well,
not
well,
much
all
of a
the
football
ads. I
fan.
mean, it's amazing.
Mhm.
Years ago when people suggested, "Oh, should you do some broad advertising for a pump?" The numbers, there were so few pumpers, and it just the money wasn't there that it didn't make sense. But when you look at kind of the numbers of people they're trying to reach now,
Mhm.
and how many people are using it, and just it's such a different thing. Like turn on and see it on the nightly news in between all those expensive biologic drugs that you see, to see a CGM ad, in there, Abbott or Dexcom.
Mhm.
So it's certainly good for the awareness building side of things.
I can definitely sign on for that. And then kind of going from what you were saying about making sure that you are not taking your own personal views to represent the broader grouping of people with diabetes. So how do you ensure as the CEO that your registry and even your community, I know they're both separate, but
Yeah.
trying to bring them together. How do you make sure that there's diversity that's reflected in your registry as it is reflected in the broader diabetes community? Because there's
Yeah.
so much there. And a lot of times we don't see it reflected in the
No,
statistics.
absolutely. And I'll tell you, sometimes, we are viewed as kind of the gold standard or authority on certain big data analysis on people with type 1. But
Mhm.
I'll admit there are things that, we're not 100% representative, and certainly our registry, when you start something, and again, we launched this just a little over a year ago, this new version of the online patient registry. Um, you kind of get the first people that join are the people that are the most connected, the most engaged, or so some of them were involved before and are online a lot and whatnot. And your first focus wasn't, we just wanted to get people in to kind of see
Sure.
some data. Then you start looking at the data and you realize, we're skewed. We have a lot of device users, and it's a lot of, white women are the highest kind of segment in our group. They drive a lot of it, which a lot of research, if you look over the years and look at different kinds of research, not in just diabetes, that's common, where you'll get
Mhm.
60% of the people will be women, and you'll be skewed to white women. And okay, that's who started with our registry. We had more of that,
Mhm.
but we're as we get bigger, we're branching out and having kind of slightly more even mix, but we still have more women than men, and we don't have enough Black or Hispanic participants. So our team is working with different social media influencers and different sources to try, what can we do to get more participation. We did a focus group with a number of people of color who joined our registry to ask
Mhm.
what made you decide to do it, and what could we do better that would get more participation. So those are the kind of things that we're working on this year in 2021. And we're starting to make some headway. I'd also say with that collaborative, the quality improvement collaborative, we get all this data that's we get all of the patients at a particular diabetes center. So we get to see the snapshot of like everyone who's seen at those sites. And so we have pretty good diversity, but it's a lot of big academic medical centers to start with. Our goal is to broaden out and diversify that. But at least we're getting everybody there. So we get to see how everyone's doing at a particular center. But it's still, we want to diversify and get to other centers that aren't the top academic centers or whatnot in these various areas. We're starting to work with the National Minority Quality Foundation, who has data like a diabetes index that you can look at, like type 1 and type 2 diabetes by zip code. It's kind of pulled together and see where all these patients are, like anonymized, but all this different analysis you can do. And we're really looking at pairing that data with the data we have to see how we can turbocharge our efforts to do more around that and go target centers and figure out ways to improve what's going on with hospitalizations and things in some of these areas. So there's a lot you can do with the data, but connecting it is something that we're pretty good at, but it's not an easy thing, and you got to work at. But we have a lot of good partners that we're talking to. So,
well, that's great to hear that. That's part of the driving mission for 2021 is to get get the broad DOC, everybody that's in there reflected in your data points.
Yeah,
so you must be spinning a lot of numbers in your head at all times. Is that how do you see things in pie charts and percentages, or?
Yeah, no, I mean it's one of the things I love about T1D Exchange, because I'm always been kind of a numbers person. So we have all kinds of numbers, and there's a lot to stay on top of, because our different groups are doing lots of different research. And our collaborative that's led by Dr. Osagi Ebekosian, and they're generating like statistics and evidence and stuff all the time, and new publications, presentations. And so I'm trying to remember, the DKA rates were what with that group? Oh my God, the people that were using CGM versus not, well, the pump users versus not who had COVID. Oh wait, no, it was the people that were seeing. I mean, there's a lot of information, but it's compelling. And the beautiful thing is we're not just measuring it and then that's all we do.
Right.
We're actually okay, so what can we do to change that? That's what matters. It's just like when CGM started, and that's great, you're getting all this data. Now, what are you doing with it?
Right.
Well, I'm changing my basal profile. I'm going to drink something or something, head off that low, or you have to take action off the data. That's like the fundamental thing we all learn with diabetes. Similarly, with all this data that we're generating and putting out there, it's like, well, let's put that data into action. And that's been the big focus. When I took over in 2019, it was, how can we do more of that? And the group, before I was there, had started to set that up, and now we've been able to really take it and run forward with that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, you got to like numbers to be in the exchange, certainly. Yeah.
Well, if you're going to live well with diabetes, you have to like numbers at least a little bit.
Yeah, so exactly.
As an English major, I'm like reluctantly going, yeah, that's kind of important.
I was a psych major, but I love numbers, so.
Well, I did have another question from the chat, that someone had asked if they need to go to their doctor or to their clinic in order to join the registry, and registry was capitalized, so it looks very fancy.
Yes. Yeah. So that is what a confusing thing. You don't have to. You can sign up directly with us. You go to our website, and you can go to t1dregistry.org.
I'm going to put that in the chat one more time. Go ahead.
Yeah, t1dregistry.org. And then we also, on our general website, t1dexchange.org/registry. It's like either way, but you can just sign up there and fill out the information. Back in the day, years ago, they used to recruit people for this big registry effort. The first version of the T1D Exchange registry years ago, they recruited them at centers, and you had to go to a center that was participating to be in our registry. We scrapped that a few years ago because someone would move. It was difficult to administer. It was costly. And we just said, we need a more direct and cost-effective way to do this. So we kind of separated and said, we'll just go direct to people. So we do a lot of Facebook and Google advertising to kind of let people know it's out there if they're searching for things or interested in diabetes research. We try to find people that way. Social media influencers and people that are out there talking to people about different topics. We try to have them help us get people into the registry. So you'll see different people online maybe promoting what we do. in an effort to get more people involved. And that's kind of our goal. So like I said, we get 75 to 100 every week are joining. So, we'll add, it'll probably be about 100 a week over the course of the year. So we'll add another 5,000 people hopefully this year. We added a little over that last year. And
that's awesome.
Now we want to connect those people to more research opportunities. So we're going to do more of that this year than we did.
And I actually just got another question. It's again from outside of the United States. So we've got somebody in New Zealand saying, I'd love to set up a registry in New Zealand. Are you able to provide help with starting this? And again, no pressure to do that during the course of this call. You're not on the spot. But what about for people who are looking to kind of...
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things that I'm a big believer in, I constantly am networking. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I'm finding, here's someone who works on this registry or whatever. And I try to learn from them, or sometimes to find out, hey, how did you guys handle this or that? So, it's a two-way street. I have people contacting me that want to know, how do you do this? And I help out a group, congenital hyperinsulinism. And there's a woman who runs that organization that has a similar type of a registry effort. So I give her, so, hey, here's what we do around these things. So I'm more than happy to, have a call, connect with me, send me a message on LinkedIn, or I'll, kind of share kind of some learnings and what we've got, and maybe connect you with the person who runs it. I mean, it's, we don't operate in other countries, but we certainly, we connect and do things and share learnings with people.
Sure, diabetes is
in
global.
Europe in particular, right? Exactly. And ATTD has this virtual care forum every month, and so I'm on that and talk to you about that. And we're talking to people about screening and people that are doing screening in different countries in Europe and I think Australia. So it's absolutely open to helping out with that.
Well, the person in the chat said thank you. So you'll be getting a message from them shortly. We had another question about kids joining the registry. So can minors join the registry? How does that work?
Yeah. So what we do is we ask, if someone's not 18, we ask the parent or guardian to kind of sign up for the individual. I actually do have to check on if there was a cut, like 16, 18 was treated differently. But we do have some parents who answer the questions for a younger child. That's we've got that. And, generally speaking, I think it follows the population. It's like roughly 15% of our participants are under 18. It's funny because I had someone challenge me on this, and I said, no, diagnosis is different from kind of prevalence, right? So half the cases of type 1 in a given year of new cases are, as I understand, under 18. And half are adults, like 20s, 30s. I played basketball with a guy who just got diagnosed New Year's Eve at 35, 36.
Oh, wow.
That happens a lot more than people realize. But when you actually look at the whole population, the 1.6, 1.7 million type 1s in the US, 85% are adults. So, that we do have the parents of kids. 15% of our registry follows that population distribution are kids, but we have the parents generally be the contact.
Got it. And that's always, that's just good internet compliance too. So then would they age into being able to fill out the forms themselves? So
yes. Yeah, no, exactly. So, and I think they do have to then kind of reorient if they want to be directly answering everything and
grab the reins.
All that. There's our registry team. I'll raise my hand. They handle all those specific nuances and things. So I hope I'm not sugarcoating. There is a little transition there has to occur. But very, very manageable. But all those little edge cases like that you have to deal with, even in the way you word things, and when we send things out, we have to think through.
But the bottom line of that would be that kids can join the registry, but they have to join under their parents' care. Yeah. So you can get that data in there. And then we did have another question asking specifically about the funding behind the T1D Exchange. I know that there are two different arms there in terms of the registry versus...
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as an organization, we're not for profit. Our largest source of funding comes from the Helmsley Charitable Trust. They're phenomenal. They have funded T1D Exchange since its inception 10 years ago. And, it's over half of our kind of operations are funded by that. We then look for other grants from like other organizations. There are different foundations and things that will fund different efforts. And then we do specific custom research projects for different research partners. A lot of them are industry partners who want to understand like how many people are having severe low blood sugar in a given year and are doing that, right? So we can do analysis or whatever and do a project to analyze with them. Some of that data either could be like the sum from our registry.
Sure.
Some of it could be a custom survey. Some of it could be from the electronic medical record data we get from the collaborative. So being a part of that collaborative, some of these centers actually send us the data all blinded. We don't know who these people are, but we just see, oh, 50% of the people at this center are using CGM, and here's the A1C distribution, and we get all this various data from them that's all anonymous from the collaborative. So we have all these different ways of analyzing a problem or a question and putting the data together to come up with something to provide. So that's going to be a bigger source of our funding moving forward. And we're trying to kind of diversify so that, we are mindful of the fact that a lot of these foundations and things are getting hit up from everyone for opportunities, very worthy opportunities. So if there are things we can do to do really meaningful research and be compensated for it so that we can keep growing this and do more of it, that's a big goal of ours.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for clarifying that. And I have another question from one of the chat participants that says, as a woman who is misdiagnosed with type 2 diabetes, have you collected data on misdiagnosis? And do you know if there have been improvements made in that area at the clinics in your group?
Yeah. So I can't speak to, has there been improvement at the clinics that we work with, but I do think the centers that we work with probably do a very, very good job on this relative to what happens overall. So anecdotal examples, the gentleman I just mentioned, right, told me he went in with an A1C. Basketball guy, cross player, 13% A1C. He lost a bunch of weight, couldn't quench his thirst, going to the bathroom all the time. Oh, you must be type 2. Here, start on metformin. So he does, and nothing happens, and his blood sugar's still bad, whatever. Then he sees someone who actually understands a bit about diabetes and is like, you need to be on insulin, and then boom. We have a woman who works on our collaborative who talked about being diagnosed at 22 with a 18.2 A1C, and they put her on metformin and sent her home.
Oh my gosh.
I cringe when I hear these stories, but I say they're anecdotal. Unfortunately, that anecdote happens a lot. And here's one listener kind of echoing that. We actually I've talked to a couple of health plans and some other providers who've all talked about this would be a very interesting project to try and tackle. That there's misdiagnosis, and there's actually a lot of bad coding that goes on in all these claims where someone is listed as a type 2 because at the ER, the person didn't know they were type 1 and called them a type 2, and then it sticks in their record. And so they have conflicting information and they don't know. So we're actually thinking about ways that we might be able to do a project with a payer or two to and a data company to try and sort this out. See how much it happens, try to help clean up data in a geography where we have some data, they have some data, and we put it together. But totally understand it's a ridiculous issue that is still happening in 2021. I don't understand how it takes 30 seconds of understanding to know that those symptoms are not typical of a type 2. It's a type 1. There are type 1s that get diagnosed in their 20s and 30s, like I mentioned. There are 15 or 20,000 of them every year. How are we not doing a better job?
And then there are people who have to live with that misdiagnosis for weeks, months, years without resolution.
So what's happening then? And what, it makes me very upset. I feel fortunate. I had 1 week of symptoms, and I knew the type 1 symptoms, and I joked to the person as I went in, yeah, it sounds like type 1, but a couple of doctors that I talked to that were in my MBA program at the time didn't think so. But once I told them my vision got blurry, because my blood sugar was like 600, then they said, you have blood, yeah, you might want to go to the student health clinic there. So I did. But this notion of people being told they're type 2 with an A1C that high with all those telltale symptoms and the weight loss and all that, it's mind blowing.
Well, it sounds like you have a potential partner in the chat that would want to connect and see how they can assist with the type 2 misdiagnosis sort of issue. But I mean, and I'm just kind of scrolling through, and I think that you've hit on the majority of the questions that were asked. So I definitely don't want to keep you more than the time that you've given to us this evening. I'm very grateful that you were able to join us. But as we round things out for the end of the hour, was there anything other than the registry link that you wanted to make sure that was communicated to our community? Because I mean, there are a whole bunch of people in the chat, and they're really excited to have you here tonight, as am I. And so, just one last sort of takeaway for the group before we sign off.
Well, first of all, there's power in numbers for us in a lot of ways. One of them, the more people we can make aware of the registry and have them get other people to join. Like I literally just talked to a woman who works for another registry who happens to have type 1. And she told me how she had gotten 5 people that she knows with type 1 to join. So
cool.
Anything that can be done for people to really help us get more people in, because someone wants to look at, there's this weird kind of side effect or comorbid condition that some people get with whether it's trigger finger or Dupuytren's contracture or this or that. Well, we have a few hundred people who have some of these things because we have thousands and thousands of people in our registry. So we can do a lot more and help people with lots of things if we have more people involved. That's one. Secondly, we are a not-for-profit that relies on funding from a lot of sources. We do have individual donors and givers who send us donations each year. So we do a bit of that. We're probably going to do a little bit more of that and make it clear kind of where the dollars can go to help things like sponsor a clinic. We spend a lot of money to bring a new center on and get all their data coming in and get them up to speed to kind of work with us. And so in order for us to get to more people, we rely on funding and donations, et cetera. So if people are able to, that's something we have information on our website for that as well. But certainly the engagement, the participation, providing information, we can do a lot with that. So that's kind of our primary ask to people. Let us take your information and turn it into something much more powerful by putting it together with other things. And that's really our main focus, our main ask that we hope people can help us with.
Well, I mean, if people are signing up and getting those question of the day emails, they'll be sucked in by those, and they'll end up filling out the research studies or surveys soon afterwards. So those are just great.
There's some great opportunity. Like some of the technology that's coming down the pipe is unbelievable. Beta cell replacement, biologic, disruption of kind of the immune reaction for people that might be just getting close. There are all these things that maybe it's not the people in our registry, but a family member might get screened and see that, they may have an antibody and there might be something that can be done, a study you could do to delay 3-5 years, who knows, needing any insulin. There are a lot of interesting things. And, JDRF is doing some interesting things, working with companies. We're trying to help work with them and others to try and do that as well. So a lot of excitement, and a lot of startups coming that there didn't used to be so many startups going after type 1. It was, that's too small a market. We're going to go after type 2. Right. But now the technology is getting where they can actually make a meaningful impact. So I'm excited about the innovation coming down the road.
Well, it sounds like you guys are going to have a pretty awesome 2021 with all of the projects and the ideas that you have going on up there. So I appreciate you taking the hour to spend with the Children with Diabetes community. It is always great to catch up with you. Thanks for fielding questions and kind of keeping it casual. I really do appreciate that. And for everyone at home, I am so glad that you broke away from your Valentine's Day celebrations to come hang out with us. I hope you had a good time. And our next Screenside Chat is going to be taking place on February 28th. We're going to have some surprise guests, so you'll have to watch the website for information on that. But Dave, thanks for joining us tonight. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Jeff does an outstanding job with the organization. We're big fans of his, and he actually helps out with our collaborative as kind of a parent advisor to the collaborative. So
it's good to be on Team Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. This is great.
My pleasure. Sorry, my 4-year-old busted in. Hopefully he's asleep. But I will see everyone soon. Dave, thanks again for joining us. And everyone at home, stay safe. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
See ya.